When Elizabeth went into labor, her husband Peter was on a routine flight. A couple of days later, without stopping at home, he immediately went to the maternity hospital with flowers. There he was told that his wife had written a refusal for the newborn twin boys, saying that she didn't need the older ones, and now 2 more had come. After signing the refusal and a couple more papers, he left in a taxi. Peter felt dizzy from what he heard. He never expected to receive such news. Of course, he had doubts, and it was the children's will, but he was very angry at Elizabeth for this vile act. When he arrived home, he didn't find his wife. She hastily packed her things, left the older 3-year-old twins, Pavel and Maxim, with Peter's elderly grandmother, and left. Peter didn't know what to do. He only had one grandmother, Anna, left, and she was elderly. But sending the children to an orphanage was morally unbearable. So he listened to his friend's advice to hire a nanny. Peter worked as a long-haul truck driver on his own truck, earning well enough to afford a nanny. In the morning, Peter decided to visit his neighbors, whom he knew well, to see who would agree to look after the children. Across the street lived Sophia, a modest 19-year-old girl. She hesitated for a long time to take on such a serious responsibility, although she worked as a nanny in a daycare center. But Peter persuaded her. After Sophia was fired from the daycare center, Peter took the children and brought them home to his older sons. In the early days, the young nanny came early in the morning and stayed with the children until late at night. But since the babies required constant care and attention, Peter insisted on Sophia moving in with him to be closer to the children. Peter was a useless dad. He couldn't even bathe or change a diaper, and he wasn't particularly eager to, justifying himself by being a hard-working man, not a caregiver. It was hard for Sophia. 2 infants, Timothy and Nikolai, and 2 3-year-old toddlers, demanded a lot of attention. Luckily, the younger ones were born calm, feeding on formula and quietly sniffling in their cribs, swaddled in blankets. Sophia didn't have time to read special pedagogical books or learn how to massage. She was learning on the fly, and the local nurse Agafia often visited her, giving advice on how to properly feed and care for the babies. At first, it was very difficult for Sophia. She even wanted to give up a couple of times, afraid that she wouldn't cope or would do something wrong. But over time, she got used to the babies and even grew to love them as if they were her own. Peter didn't stay at home for long between flights, but during that time they were all together. Him, Sophia, and the 4 boys, 2 noisy, cheerful rascals, and 2 chubby little ones. They felt very cozy together. Had plenty to talk about, planned buying clothes for the kids together, lounged on the couch together, laughing and tossing the babies back and forth. And somehow, one morning Peter and Sophia woke up in the same bed, and a week later, they filed a marriage application. By this time, Peter had finalized his divorce with Elizabeth and stripped her of her parental rights through the courts. Sophia didn't listen to anyone then, neither her parents nor her friends, who said that Peter was just using her as a servant for the kids and didn't really love her. After all, their first family with his wife didn't turn out well, and it was unclear how Sophia would behave, but she loved the boys madly. And she liked Peter, believing that if he needed her, he would value and love her and wouldn't run away from his 4 children. They had a modest wedding, in a narrow circle, without a wedding dress and veil. Peter said it was unnecessary, and Sophia didn't insist, feeling embarrassed. Besides, that wasn't the main thing was to live well. But living well didn't quite work out. Peter turned out to be far from the best husband. He practically stopped helping with household chores and the children at home. He'd say, "I'm tired from the flights, let me at least rest at home." He started skipping more shots of alcohol. He started leaving more and more often. He spent less and less time at home. And he didn't give much money either. They had to beg for diapers and fruit. If Sophia started to say something, he would sharply cut her off. "Don't like it? Pack your things and leave." But she couldn't leave the children because over the years she had grown accustomed to them, and she couldn't imagine life without them. 2 more years passed. And then one day, Peter, returning from another flight, having eaten heartily, sat down on the couch and called Sophia over. "Sophia, I won't beat around the bush, I'll tell you straight. I have a woman in another town. We see each other often, even more often than I see you. And we'll soon have our own child. I'm planning to marry her. And, well, I need to divorce you. Sorry." Sophia froze upon hearing those cruel and cold words, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe that Peter had actually said that. What about her? What about the children? "I won't give you the children," Sophia managed to choke out. "And please, soon I'll have my own child anyway." "So whose are these?" Sophia almost choked with indignation. "Just don't start lecturing me on morals now. You won't give them up anyway, and all I need from you is a divorce." "Fine, but only if you agree to let me adopt the boys." "And you promise," Peter replied, "that you won't say anything bad about me to the boys. After all, they should respect their biological father." They divorced, quickly and quietly. Peter gave his consent for Sophia to adopt the children and left them the house. Sophia told the boys that their father had gone to work in a distant country to build tall buildings for poor people and wouldn't be back for a while. But Sophia was afraid that someone in the neighborhood would let slip to the boys that they were not biologically hers, so they had to move to a neighboring district, selling Peter's house. After finishing school, Sophia managed to complete hairdressing courses and started cutting hair for her new neighbors, and through their recommendations, their acquaintances. Then she had more and more clients, her hands were golden. And her soul was kind. People gravitated towards her. She earned enough, and they had everything they needed for life. Sophia didn't expect or demand anything from Peter, and he didn't bother her. "Mom, is Dad coming soon from the distant country? Will he go to school with us on September 1st? Maxim and Pavel were packing their school bags and dividing pencils and pens equally. They couldn't wait to go to school, eager to show their teacher how well they could read and draw. Sophia put the bags out of reach so Nikolai and Timofey couldn't empty them and shook her head. "No, my dears, Dad won't be able to come, he still has a lot of houses to build in the distant country." Peter didn't show up. Didn't call, and Sophia knew nothing about him and didn't want to know. The main thing was that the children were nearby. She loved her boys very much. They studied together, sang, played football, and splashed in cold water in the mornings. In the evenings, they would all sit together, drink tea, and invent fairy tales. Sometimes the stories turned out funny and amusing. When the boys fell asleep, Sophia would write the stories down in a thick notebook. She imagined her adult sons reading them to their own children someday, laughing and remembering those happy and warm evenings. Years passed. The sons grew up, the older ones got married, and gave Sophia a grandson, while the younger ones were still studying at university. Every weekend, the whole family gathered together. They cooked something delicious, sometimes they would read a fairy tale book with their mother over tea, and each time they would laugh like little children. That fateful weekend happened to coincide with the birthdays of the younger sons, Nikolai and Timofey. It was a very warm day, the boys had set up music and a table in the yard. The daughters-in-law worked their magic in the kitchen, the men grilled meat, Maria and Natalia, the girlfriends of the younger sons, set the table. Sophia stood leaning against the doorframe, smiling and thinking about what a happy wife and mother she was. She was so lost in thought, looking at her children, that she didn't immediately notice the elderly man who entered their gate. He walked through the yard, inspected the premises, and then loudly announced, "Why, dear father, is nobody welcoming me?" Everyone froze, and Sophia gasped, barely recognizing Peter. He staggered and attempted to embrace Timofey, then Nikolai, but the boys recoiled from the unfamiliar man's stale alcohol breath. Sophia looked at Peter in horror, not knowing how to explain to her sons that their father, the hero who had built a city for the poor in a distant country, was nothing but an old drunkard who had abandoned them to fate long ago. Everyone remained silent, looking at Peter and then at their mother in incomprehension. Finally, the eldest son, Maxim, couldn't hold back any longer. So we're supposed to respect you, Father? Where have you been all this time, Dad? Or do you think we haven't figured it out yet? We should respect Mom. She raised us all alone, brought us up, and taught us about life, added Nikolai. Your mom? Peter abruptly interrupted. She's not your mother at all, just a nanny from the neighboring house. Your real mother abandoned all of you, and I hired Sophia to look after you, Peter declared, pointing indifferently at Sophia. The last sentence hit like a thunderbolt out of the blue. Sophia's eyes darkened at this, she turned away and ran into the house. She went into the bedroom, where her grandchildren were peacefully sleeping in their cribs, sat down on a chair next to them, and covered her face with her hands. And so my happiness has ended, Sophia thought to herself and bitterly wept. The door to the room quietly opened. Sophia lifted her tear-stained face and saw her sons, no longer boys, but 4 strong, handsome men. They stood there, embracing each other's shoulders, smiling and looking at her. Maxim had their fairy tale book. He handed it to Sophia, and she saw a message written on the last page in large letters. And they lived happily ever after because their most beloved and best mother in the world was with them.